This is the Clive Barker Podcast, episode 331. In what is likely our last episode in 2021, Jose and Ryan discuss the 1993 book, Clive Barker Illustrator 2. Do us a favor and subscribe or follow us wherever you get audio so you never miss an episode. Well, welcome. This is episode 331 of the Clive Barker Podcast. Good morning, Jose, or I guess afternoon now, right?
Yeah, it's 12:31 here in Ohio, and it's good morning for you. You're probably still kind of waking up over there.
Yeah, and I'm Ryan.
And you're in Alaska in Fairbanks, so surrounded by snow and cold. Here we are. It's almost episode 333, which is half of 666,
right.
If you're into numbers. And we're talking about Fred Burke's Illustrator 2 today, which is an art book.
And we had talked a while back that our next episode was going to be with Doug Bradley. We had to do some rescheduling, so that's still in the works. It's just we don't have a date for that yet. Some stuff came up, and then that one didn't work out. But it's still going to get rescheduled.
That was totally on me. I had to reschedule, and Doug Bradley was very accommodating. And I've had time to watch The Killer Tongue in the meantime, which is a movie with Doug Bradley and Robert Englund, where a piece of a meteor falls into a nun's bowl of soup, and then she turns into a dominatrix, and her poodles become drag queens. That
sounds nuts.
Yeah, I can actually read what I told Doug here. I said by email. On a lighter note this week, I rewatched The Killer Tongue 96, and oh boy, I have questions. And Doug said, La lingua asesina. Ha ha ha. That's a conversation. So, yeah, expect that to pop up whenever we talk to Doug Bradley, because if you haven't seen it, you got to watch it. And it was directed by a guy called Alberto Sciamma. It's a British-Spanish comedy sci-fi horror film. So, the production was also Spanish and British. Okay. And then the story happens in New Mexico desert. And I'm not sure if they really filmed in New Mexico or if they filmed in Spain, but I will look into that.
Huh. Crazy.
It is. It's very crazy.
I bet it still makes more sense than the Barn of the
Blood Llama.
Yeah.
Oh man, I mean, I was looking through Amazon Prime this morning. I was trying to find some stuff to watch while I was watching breakfast, and I found out that there was a movie called Llamageddon.
Yeah, I saw it. They've been pushing that on me too.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Apparently, it's a 2015 movie, and the image is like a llama with glowing red eyes, like it's a Satanist llama or something.
Yeah.
And, I haven't seen it, but it's a killer llama from outer space that crash lands on Earth and brings death and destruction to everyone in its path. So, Catalina and Joe from Little Spark Films, if you're listening to this, check it out, Llamageddon.
I don't know if I'd recommend that. I mean, it sounds to me like they're making it stupid on purpose.
I will check anything once. I mean, I watched The Killer Tongue.
Yeah,
which is pretty weird.
But I mean, when they're trying to make movies dumb on purpose because they're trying to capture that feeling of watching a terrible movie.
Oh yeah, like Hobgoblins 2.
It usually flops.
Yeah, you need to have that naive attempt of playing it straight, but just failing miserably. Whenever you just try to make it, bad on purpose, like Hobgoblins 2, it's trying too hard, That's what I say.
Yeah, that's what I would be afraid of. And Clive Barker's not in it, so I don't know if I'll ever have time to get around to this Llamageddon.
I don't think you're missing out on much if you don't watch Llamageddon, to be honest. It's just one of those things that floods these streaming services. Mm-hmm. But going back to Illustrator 2.
Yes.
I have the first printing here. It was a book from December 1993. And I want to thank Francis Clay Ornick, one of our listeners and one of my Facebook friends, for giving me the chance to buy a copy from him. So I have this copy here, belonged to Francis Clay Ornick.
I thought I sent you Illustrator.
You sent me the first one.
Oh, okay. And you didn't have the other one?
No. I got it a couple of years ago, I think. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. The interesting thing about this is that, when they made the first book in like 1991, it was the tone of it was like, hey, that this famous author that's kind of blowing up. You know, he makes movies and he writes all these great books. Did you know he also draws? And the tone of this book is completely different since that time. He had the Best Cutler Gallery opening. That was a huge success. They extended it a few times. And on top of that, The Thief of Always had come out, and that showcased his abilities as an illustrator, making a really good children's fable book.
It really broke it out, and the gallery was so packed when they were doing that Best Cutler show that the last day was like super packed. And there were punks in there and normal looking people and normal. Yeah. So that was a testament to how fascinating this is. And it really opens up Clive's art to the public, right? Because at this point, like you said, some people didn't know that he was also such a talented artist and painter.
Yeah. So I felt like the tone of this one had really shifted, and it's like, now people know that he's an artist, and they even sort of apologized in the book, saying like, we've heard since we made the first book that calling him an illustrator is sort of pejorative, but since the first one was called Illustrator, we decided to call this one Illustrator 2 to keep the same scheme or the same theme going on it.
Yeah, it was a great idea. I mean, these books and the text and the interviews that is in these books is so good. I mean, there's stuff in here that Clive talks about his art and the way he expresses himself and what drawing means to him that you can't find this stuff anywhere else.
It's a really cool interview format where the interviewer's voice is mostly cut out, right? So he's answering questions, but you don't hear the questions most of the time. Clive will go on a long talk about a subject, and then he'll just say like Fred Burke will say like some little prompt like, but Clive doesn't seem to have any problem with this, or and then Clive will do a whole other long block of text.
Right, exactly. And he goes to expound in great detail about the philosophy of his art and how these drawings are almost like a snapshot of who he was at the time, a snapshot of the things that were influencing him at the time. And you can see that in the way that some of these styles are different in the 70s and then in the 80s and in the early 90s. So you do get to see that this comprises about at least 20 years of art in this book. That's the period that they got.
I think the earliest one I saw going back was 74.
Right.
Which he would have been 20 at that time.
It starts with an introduction by Charles V. Miller, who was the editor-at-large of a art forum. And then he goes on to talk a little bit about the images of demons and what Clive means to communicate with this stuff, the vocabulary of Clive Barker's art. It's a really good introduction. He says here stuff like, if we allow ourselves to accompany Barker on his descent into the underworld, we will learn something about ourselves as well, about him. And we learn something about ourselves because, like Clive says in a different part of this book, when you look at a painting, it evokes these feelings of contemplation, and it creates this little room inside your mind where you see the image and then you think about its themes and what about it represents and how it makes you feel and react emotionally to it and stuff like that. So when you do that, you're also kind of analyzing a little bit of what makes you tick in regards to art.
There was a lot of really good analysis of the way that it's an artist trying to express their reality in a way that other people can understand, and even the difference between popular art and this, I forget what he called it, but where an artist makes one painting and sells that one painting and that's it, versus like if you make a book or you make movies and you're trying to get out to everybody. And that was also interesting in what we were talking about earlier, where there were people showing up that were asking all these kind of questions about art galleries, like, do I have to pay to get in? And if I come in, do I have to buy something?
Right.
He really loved the idea of sort of bringing art to the masses and sort of bridging this gap between the art world and the pop culture world, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, because sometimes galleries seem like this weird part of this world of secret handshakes and friends and patrons, and stuff that it's kind of alien for the regular person who doesn't really get into art or buy art. And then he even mentions that I've had this feeling before, going into an art gallery, and there's this Brunhilde looking at a computer from across the gallery, looking at you like, what's this guy doing here? He's not going to buy anything.
Yeah.
And you do get that feeling sometimes because, they come immediately up to you and say, oh, hi, well, this work is from this. And you feel like they're giving you the whole spiel, and you're like, yeah, I just wanted to see it because I looked from it outside and it looked really amazing. And I just wanted to see it closer. And now you're investing all this time in trying to sell me this piece. And I'm like, I don't really want to buy it. I just wanted to look at it closer. But it's okay to do that. It's okay because that's what art is for. It's for contemplating. And, if you can afford it, great, fine, buy it, put it in your house. If you can't, it's there because it makes the world more beautiful. And there's no shame in just going in to look at it and just enjoy it visually because that's what it's for.
And he had mentioned that, in a gallery like type thing like this, you can even, if you can't buy an original, you could buy a print. A poster.
Or a book, or a catalog with all the paintings in there. So there's always that accessibility.
So then they have their memory of the event plus something that they can still hang on their wall that they, and maybe they paid $20.
Right. And so here's some interesting things here at the beginning. There's these blue pages that have some drawings and paintings of Clive Barker. And some of them are from the cover roughs for The Thief of Always. Yeah. So you have the little boy with the monster mask on and the stars behind him. And you have the wings of Carne. What was the name of that demon that flies?
Karna, yeah.
Karna, yeah. You have the wings, these wings of, or maybe it's like the kid's wings when he turns into like a vampire in Halloween.
That could be it too, yeah.
And then Mr. House on the top of the hill. And then there's the Mr. House with a face.
Mr. Hood.
Mr. Hood, yes, not Mr. House. Mr. Hood with wearing the house as a hat, and then the stairs go into this face, which you do see this in the final. So this is when you start noticing, if you were a young Clive Barker fan at the time, you're like, oh, so he also worked on these covers. Oh my God. So he not only wrote the stuff that's inside, but he also is the guy who drew these covers. So it really brings you into that Blakean package of art that Clive would do for some of his most loved works.
And back when this came out, this was the only place that you could find these rough sketches or paintings of the cover.
Sure,
right? This is the first time they were ever published anywhere, and the internet wasn't really a thing where you could look up stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, there was that old clivebarker.com website where you can still go see paintings, but I think this might predate that.
Yeah, not in 1993 though.
Yeah.
They were like 97, I think, or something like that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, Lost Souls.
Yeah.
But there's some amazing like early drawings here from 1971. Like you got this lycanthrope, in one of these blue pages at the beginning. So it's like a man with like a face that's merging into like a doggish kind of face. You have the Celebrants, which is two naked men, arm on each other's shoulder, just staring back at you in this weird, fascinating landscape. And their faces are like the sun and the moon. So that's pretty striking. He's got a great sense of depth because he has all these like perspective on the floor. He has these tiles going into that point behind the painting.
And then stuff that's teasing Everville, which had not come out yet. He was still working on Everville. We've got Harmon there, a sketch from 1992, and that book didn't come out until, I think, 94.
Yeah. I think at this time Clive was just finished Imagica or something.
Yes.
He talks a lot about Imagica and about how he wrote it in 18 months and how, it was a strange period in his life that he wasn't happy and he wasn't sad. He just had to get it done, but...
He finished Imagica and Thief of Always was after that. And
then he moved to the US.
Yeah, and then started on Everville.
Yeah, I think he finished some of that stuff in the US actually in an empty house at the time.
Yeah.
So you have some Weaveworld illustrations here. You have, like you said, Harmon from Everville. So it shows that he already had these things like bouncing around. Yeah. And probably working a big file box of references for these books. Got some pastels.
And then we have hybrid on one of the last of these pages here, which is a full-blown painting, right? Which is we wouldn't see books of his paintings until later, until quite a bit later.
Yes. Yeah, and I think hybrid was also the poster used for the Clive Barker exposition that Russell Charrington did a couple of years ago or something.
Right, yeah, that's right.
Which means that Russell might be the one who owns this painting right now, or at least that's what it seems.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff here that I'll tell you what was the first book that I really got in touch with Clive's sketches was Shadows in Eden. Because that book has a lot of like nonfiction and essays and stuff and interviews, but then it's also profusely illustrated with all these little sketches and stuff. So some of those are the same that we see here.
Yeah.
And that's really what got me more in touch with Clive Barker's sketches and art.
But that one came out later. That was like...
Yeah.
Wasn't it? I think it was later.
Yeah, I think so.
Or maybe around the same time as this book. I think maybe it was like 93.
Yeah.
Because I got that when it came out too, and I just poured over that one.
I got that a few years after it came out, and like I said, the Illustrator books, I only really got them more recently.
Okay.
Yeah, like I got this Illustrator 2 back in 2017, and then you sent me Illustrator 1. But that I thought to myself, why didn't I buy these books before? Because these are pretty awesome. But for some reason, either because they were expensive at the time, or I couldn't find them, or other reasons, I guess I didn't really have them in my collection yet. But now I do, and I'm very happy that I do.
Well, and they're also kind of building up to like these penultimate art books, right? The Imaginer series.
Yeah, the Imaginer.
Yeah,
wow.
that's a huge step up. I mean, these books are great. And for their time, they were the best things that you could get. But
these books are a cool Corvette, but then Imaginer is like a Rolls Royce. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's a fleet of Rolls Royces.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, I'm so glad that they were able to pull that off too. You'd think a series of eight books would be tough to keep it going that whole time, but they did it.
Absolutely. There's a really striking one in these blue pages at the beginning that I really wish I owned, which is the One-Eyed Boy from 1991. It's the one with the Cyclops with a blue background.
Oh, yeah. Right.
It's the one in the very last blue page here. This was a cover for a magazine called Marvel Age. I have that issue. It was a Clive Barker issue where they were talking about the Barker verse and stuff that they were releasing with Ecto Kid and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a special Marvel Age issue, and the cover was the One-Eyed Boy, which is kind of a recurring thing, right? Like the bald-headed Cyclops looking at you. It's just fascinating. Just the way he draws it is so abstract and at the same time so figurative. It's like you just want to come over and say, hi, hey, who are you and where are we? This is a very striking, engaging. He's looking at you with his big eye.
Right.
Yeah, you feel watched.
I guess it depends on whether he's wearing pants or not.
No,
that's a good point. I was noticing as we were going through this book that a lot of the characters are wearing shirts, but they don't have pants on.
Yeah. I mean, some of these are naked. Some of these have like what look like ritualistic, shamanistic, like clothing, like tunics and bandanas and masks and stuff like that. More priestly robes at some point, but some of them are completely nude, and I guess that has to do with a little bit of the Barker strips down his characters to the essence, right? It's like they just, when you have a nude, it becomes timeless. It doesn't become constrained by fashion or period clothes. The clothing in the Clive Barker characters usually is there just for, I wouldn't say modesty, but it just seems like most of them are, like I said, theatrical or robes or ecclesiastical or ritualistic in some way or shamanistic.
Or they just wear just pretty plain, like this guy is wearing a plain T-shirt.
Just a plain T-shirt.
Or they'll have like a striped shirt or something like that, but no pants.
Yeah, they're just incidental. They're not the focus of it. That's what I'm saying.
Exactly. Yeah, because their form is usually the focus of the sketch or art.
Yeah. So this continues. The text here continues to talk about the art hierarchy world, and Clive talks about the world of galleries and that the constraints of like accessibility in the gallery world for regular people who just want to look at art. Says so that's the part you were talking about. And like you said, there'll be some books, there'll be some posters, there'll be some T-shirts, and that will be neat, and everybody will have a fine time. You can go away with a T-shirt or a poster, but you pay $20 and you've got something you can put on your wall.
Yeah.
And maybe you've had this experience which maybe you never had before, because some people don't really have art in their homes, or if they do, it's like cheap IKEA stuff or just something that they bought at Goodwill, or like a print of a painting that everybody knows or something like that. And it's part of your subconscious. I mean, the popular subconscious, so many people have Gustav Klimt's The Kiss on their living room, right? I mean, a print of that. And it's like, it's part of our genetic, DNA of art. But it's different when you actually find a real piece of art. And I mean real in the sense that an actual one-of-a-kind piece, not a print. Not saying Gustav Klimt is not real art, heaven forbid. But when you find something that you know who made it and you own it and you feel like it calls to you and you put it on your wall and you found you know that this piece of art has found its place with you and you're the curator of this piece now. It's a completely different feeling. It's not just a decoration. It's something that means a lot to you.
Yeah. And then the opposite side of that coin is that if you own the original and there were never any prints of it made for anywhere, then only one person gets to enjoy it, and that is a little elitist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So he's kind of walking a fine line, I guess, there, between being a popular artist and selling original art, which he also does do.
Someone who's honest to the truth and the stuff that emerges from him, and he just puts it out unabashedly and without any constraints of commercialism.
Yeah.
He also brings up here in the page 9, he says, life calling of an artist can be a lonely one. Other people are both our salvation and our temptation as artists. Our salvation because that's why we're finally making this stuff, to communicate to other people and to prove that our insanity is not ours alone. But then he also talks a little bit about the obsessive nature that you can become, obsessive with painting.
And he talked about perfection, right? The idea that people that you just have to understand that your work is never finished, and that you could, you have an idea in your head, and the work that you make is never going to 100% match the perfect idea of the thing that's in your head, and you have to be okay with that. And you have to celebrate your imperfection instead of lamenting it.
And I'm also interested in always hearing stuff about the period that he was writing Imajica, because it's my favorite book. So he says here, the last 3 months of Imajica, I was at my desk 15 hours a day. I would eat, sleep, and drink Imajica. I would take it to the John with me and actually sit and write on the John. I don't think I was very good company for anybody, and I wasn't even happy. I was at a place where I was neither happy nor sad. It's just that's what I had to do. I certainly wasn't thinking, boy, this is wonderful. Aren't I in this shamanistic state of communicating? None of that. It was just what I had to do. I was like the farmer whose fields were high with corn, all of which had to be harvested by a certain time. And if that meant you worked by the moon, that's the way you did it. I was a little disappointed. I was like, oh, I thought that, writing Imajica would have been this amazing experience. But I get it. I mean, I get it. He was...
And I remember meeting him during that time, and during talks he talked about it like all this stuff is getting poured into his head, and he was scared that he couldn't get it out fast enough and that he might forget things. And that's also mentioned here in this book too. With Imajica in particular, he was just worried that like he's getting all these ideas and he had all this stuff going into his head, and he's like, if I don't write this now, I'm going to forget. Right.
He says here, it took me 18 months to write that book. I kept being afraid that I would lose something of what drew me to the book in the first place. I would lose the vision. I wouldn't know why I was doing this huge thing. And then he says, I might be able to carry through the narrative thrust okay because I could do that mechanically. But then I'd get to the last 30 pages and then I'd slap my hand to my forehead and say, well, what was the point? Which, I understand that fear, but in Imagica, it didn't really happen. So once I got to the end of that, I totally got the point. It was an amazing book, and I thought that it was just a magical thing.
Yeah.
Completely. So I'm glad that he was able to do that so quickly.
And in the context of perfection, right? He talked about Imagica, that some people, read it every year, and then there are other people that complained that saying it was overwritten and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I always say that Imagica is my Bible, and I hadn't read this book before I started saying that. But then it's like there's a part here in this book that Clive Barker says that for some people, Imagica is like their Bible, and I'm like, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Wow, he gets me.
Well, and honestly, I asked him one time about his religious beliefs, and he says, "Have you read Imagica?" I'm like, "Well, yeah." And he goes, "Well, there, it's all in there."
Yeah, he says that Gentle is like Imagica is like the story of Christ without Christ, right?
Yeah. Well, although Christ is in it in a couple of aspects, right? I mean, he was the first, he was the prior reconciler, and he was also, and there's also Father Athanasius. Yeah,
and he's the son of God. Gentle ends up being the son of God, and it's weird because, in a way, Imagica is like those Japanese RPGs where you start by being a lowlife, guy
who forgot
lives in a warehouse and is a fake artist, and then you end up killing God at the end of the book.
Right.
There's this huge journey that goes through.
Yeah, and honestly, I guess to bring it back to what we do, that was an interesting thing to follow up on with our Jericho Squad game. Right, is this idea of what is life like for people after their god is dead. And that was kind of the thrust of the main bad guy's problem. It's like he was gone for the last 200 years, and all of a sudden he comes back and his god is dead, and nobody seems to care, and so he's really pissed off about it.
Yeah, I think Cassius was trying to fill in that void, that power void left behind with the Aboriginal children. And this is we're just going into like our RPG now. If you haven't listened to our YouTube streams of the game, then you should go and look at those because we just ended the season.
And the Aboriginal was another name for Hepexamendios.
Right. And we do that because he created such an interesting world that we just want to live in it. And for this whole season of Jericho Squad, we kind of did. And we not only visited Imagica and his Order X, we visited Weave World, we visited Midian. So that was a lot of fun.
And spent a lot of our time in the actually probably half the campaign was in the false hell of Gregorius from Down Satan. Yeah,
in Africa.
Yeah.
So that was also an interesting set of maps that we went through.
Yeah.
Meeting the creatures of the gulfs. On page 16, there's this dog-faced humanoid person with an enormous erection. That is the image that went on to accompany the story Animal Life. At least the shoulders of the dog and the head. That's when I first found Animal Life, the short story of Clive, where there's an earthquake in Los Angeles and some guy gets a house falls on his head.
That's
and his
when
dog.
You read the online version of it, right?
Yeah.
I think I have it in a book.
Yeah, and an interesting point that Clive does in this interview is to say that not all artists need to be troubled, and not all artists need to be anarchists in terms of the status quo of the culture that they live in, but sometimes they want to be an influence on that culture because they value that culture. And I guess that's what Clive has always been trying to do. He's always been trying to make himself a household name, make movies, which is one of the most, pop culture things you can do in the 90s.
But a counterpoint to that is that he said, if you start to believe your own hype, all of a sudden you become a different person and you start making your art from the point of view that you're that person that everybody says you are. Like if he starts thinking, oh, I'm the maestro, I'm a shaman, then he'll start making his art from that sort of pretentious point of view, so he tries really hard not to think of himself in those terms.
Yeah. And there's some really amazing sketches here. They're sometimes very simplistic, but sometimes extremely detailed. Like you have this the Reach, this woman-looking figure reaching out with her hand, and there's like these bolts of light going through her skull.
What page is that on?
On page 18. And then you have this Free Spirit, which is this very flowy, almost like flame-like character who's like a woman with her arm over her head, and the other arm is reaching above, like she's dancing.
Is that charcoal? Oh, it's just pencil. Okay.
Yeah. Well, probably a very thick pencil.
Yeah.
And then you got this juggling the golden ball. And I love the way that Clive makes his characters in his sketches. Like, when he adds a title to it, it becomes a thing. It becomes like a scenario. It becomes this thing for your brain to build a story around. And I mentioned this before in other art discussions of Clive Barker, but it's just the title can add so much to a sketch. It's imposing. It's very fascinating by itself as well. But when there's a title associated to it, I think it creates this whole. It's like a big bang that gets created around this sketch where it's like, I wonder what their world is like. Why is it called Juggling the Golden Ball? What does the golden ball do? Why are they juggling it?
Yeah.
Who is this person? What did they do? Are they a guardian?
And I think that Abarat was a way of giving a story to all of these, paintings and all the crazy, things that go on in your mind when you're looking at them and trying to make a story around them. He's like, hey, I can do that.
I know. Yeah, I agree.
On page 20, there's a really detailed sketch here, or with a lot of realistic shading and stuff, and it reminds you that he can do this sort of more photorealistic stuff, like the books,
very figurative
Books of Blood covers, the cover of The Thief of Always. And stuff like this. So his art style is really fluid. And I think the introduction, the guy talked about he had a really distinctive style. And I think yes and no, right? I mean, because there's a lot of stuff you can say, oh, that's definitely Clive Barker. But there are other ones that you look at sometimes and you wouldn't know.
I mean, I kind of have this feeling when I see a sketch that I know, and of course I'm looking at a book that says it's Clive Barker art, so obviously, but it's like if I look at a sketch, I sometimes recognize it, even if it's not his. I recognize, oh, that's in Clive Barker style. Yeah. So I do think that, except even when he's doing it figuratively, there's telltale signs of
the way,
like the facial structures that he uses,
and the way that they look at you, that they look directly at the viewer.
Right. Like this pencil drawing called Man, Woman, and Dog from 1979. It's one of the most figurative things I've seen, apart from the Clive Barker, Books of Blood covers and stuff. It's amazing. I wish I knew if this is really just in black and white or if it's in some sort of colored crayons that he might have used or whatever, because I don't know if the photo is black and white or the piece itself is black and white. But it's a fascinating thing. It's like a woman sitting on the floor, her dress pulled down to show her breasts. She's staring right at you. And then there's a man that kind of looks like Clive Barker in a way, also sitting cross-legged next to her with his arm around her. And then there's a dog on the floor.
This guy looks a little bit older than Clive looked at that time.
Yeah. I guess this became Clive later.
Yeah. And so, And you're right. I mean, the way the facial structure of these characters does make you think that this is a Clive Barker painting. I would also say, or picture. I would also say it probably is just in black and white, because I think that if it were in color, they would have put it in the earlier section or left it out.
They're sitting down on the floor on this detailed rug that has all these patterns around it. And then there's the dog, like a plain old dog, like a mutt. And there's a few bowls on the floor, maybe a bowl of food and a bowl of water.
Yeah.
And the wall behind them is not just a house. You can see some windows, but it looks like there's a tree growing into the wall as well.
Yeah.
With leaves and a little trunk that kind of, maybe it's just a tree in a vase inside a house, but it almost looks like it's part of the...
I think they're outside. I think they're sitting on a blanket or something outside, because there's like...
Yeah, that could be it.
There's another tree off to the left, and you can see the horizon.
Oh, I see it, yeah.
So I think
is that a horizon or is that a wall? Because the house behind them is really small.
Yeah, I think that is a small house behind them. I think.
Yeah, well, it's just this wonderful scenery that just makes you feel the sense of unity, the sense of peace, of tranquility, the tree behind them, the dog sleeping at their feet, the bowls of water and food, the baring of her breasts, obviously symbolic as well. And the man, his expression is calm, relaxed. Yeah. He's kind of smiling. He's just looking somewhere off in the distance. He's not looking straight at us. The woman is.
Yeah.
But a very serene unity feeling I get out of this. So this is the part where Clive is talking about that he tries to make people focus on their metaphysical lives and their belief systems. Yeah. Because nowadays certain people have an absence of metaphysics in their life. And this is important. He says, I firmly believe one of the reasons why people are brought to my pictures and my books is not because of the thrills and the sex, though that's kind of fun, but because I get this out of letters I receive from people, but because there is some reference to a larger schematic in these things. These pieces attempt to be about what life is for. Interesting, right? I mean, this makes you think that when you see these strange creatures and these ritualistic, shamanistic humanoid figures and the rituals that they're performing and the dances they're doing, they're living life, right? They're performing this almost like this dance. They're just engaging you and telling you, hey, look at us. You could be like us. You don't have to be boring. You don't have to be, rooted in the suburban banal style of life. Look at us. We're magical and we're beautiful and we're free and we're creative. That's what life is for.
Yeah. Well, and that is kind of Clive's religion, sort of in a nutshell, too.
Yeah.
His imagination and creativity. In a little bit, it sort of dovetails into this idea that, people think that the art world and the religious world are separate. And he says that's nonsense. I mean, you look at all these medieval paintings, they were mostly depicting religious events and, religious themes. And he says that's what he does, and he doesn't separate that stuff at all.
Yeah, I mean, he comes with some interesting quotes here. He says, we all agree that there are some places where reality roughly overlaps for us, but then there are large areas, dream times, daydream times, fantasy times, when there are very private realities which don't overlap substantially with other people's. Yeah. And I would argue that this is true for people from different cultures, or people who have different experiences, culturally speaking and religiously speaking. I mean, if someone's a Muslim and another person is a Christian, they will have different ways of looking at morality and sin and to what their life meaning is, how they deal with other people. In the same way that me being Portuguese and you being from the U.S., we both have cultural references that are overlapping, but we also have other things that it's hard to communicate to each other, like certain feelings certain melancholies that only Portuguese people have, that U.S. people don't experience, doubts, insecurities, certain ways of looking at life that are different according to not just your culture, but also who you are as a person. The same goes about creative impulses, right? I mean, some people will have more creative impulses that are geared towards comic books and drawing comic-styled art. Other people will have grown up with different cultural references, and they will be more – they'll paint things that are a little more abstract. That's not just part of their genetic cultural DNA, but it's also part of who they are and how they express themselves, and we all express ourselves in different ways.
It's also an interesting perspective because it also describes how we think of people who are crazy. Right. Yeah. I mean, because you like in Lord of Illusions, right? That doctor says we have to all agree on what's real, and right. And so that's what he's talking about. There's the one circle of the reality that we all agree on, And that's what makes us sane, is that we're all in agreement on this particular part.
Right.
And then we have our private stuff, and as long as our private stuff doesn't cross over into in a way that's harmful, like I think the example he used was a guy that thinks his dreams tell him he needs to kill John Lennon.
Yeah.
Then, and as long as that dream life doesn't cross over and become harmful in some way and cause chaos and interfere with the agreed upon reality, then we're not crazy.
Right. It's like the depiction of a thing is not the thing. Just like writing a book with a violent story doesn't mean that you're inflicting violence upon anybody. It's okay to express yourself in a violent story. It's a different matter if you actually go out and commit violence against other people. Yeah. But there's an interesting thing he says here. The artist's job is to use this private place, this private area, within the context of consensual reality. I'm bringing reports back from a place which seems very private to me and explaining it and expressing it in a way that makes people realize, oh, that is also part of what I believe. That is also part of the way I think. That is also part of my imaginings. And I'm going to give people here a sneak preview of a couple of sentences that I wrote for the introduction of our book, which we're finalizing. Yeah. We love the world. We love people. We love art. We love a million things because they make us feel whole. Inside and outside our minds, we're creating and furnishing the world and the spaces we live in and inhabit with things that fit our inner selves, that we feel express our hearts in some way. We adorn our souls with art, so it's important to make it as pleasurable, challenging, and interesting as possible. Clive Barker himself once said at the LA premiere of his Nightbreed Director's Cut at the Crest in Westwood that God gives you the chance to be odd and the devil gives you normality. I complete this by saying, therefore, the art we fill our waking lives with is important. They have a formative effect on us that sometimes just feels like another piece of light finding its way into a little drawer inside us, vacant until then.
That's perfect. Yeah. And that sort of expresses the next point I was going to make, because I think that Clive was being a little bit humble when he talks about how people say, people look at art and say, hey, that's part of a little bit of what I believe. I think it's also can influence what we believe. Like you just said in that introduction, that, it's not just like, hey, that's also similar to what I think. It's not just that. It's also that it can help shape, our thoughts and feelings and opinions on things. And
can help you understand yourself a little more, like, oh, this calls to me, and now I know a little bit more about myself when I look at a piece of art. Yeah. So that's always very important. That's why it's so important for people to have contact with art and have the chance to be creative. And otherwise, they just become drones. They don't have metaphysics in their lives. They just become poorer. Their inner lives become poorer, and then they don't see the beauty in things because they haven't learned to see that in art. They haven't been exposed to that way of looking at something and seeing it in more ways than one, which is what art teaches you to do. Art is a vision from an artist. When you look at a painting, that is the depiction of reality through the eyes of the artist. And so if you don't have a way of learning how to do that with the things around you, they're just things. They don't have any meaning. They don't have any emotional connection to them. And that would be terrible. That would just be a horrible way to live your life.
And I think it makes people rigid in their way of thinking. And instead of looking for things that expand their horizons, they might look for things that reinforce the stuff that they already believe.
Sure. That's a big problem nowadays.
Yeah. Oh, and you just touched on something that we should probably go back on a little bit. This isn't related to our topic today, but part of the reason that we have not had any episodes out in a while is because we are finalizing the draft of our book to start shopping publishers or look into self-publishing if that's what we need to do, and getting it ready for an editor, because I think, editing, one thing about editing a book of interviews is that the grammar is weird, right? Because people talk in long run-on sentences, and it's different from the way you write. And so...
And sometimes they stop in the middle of a sentence and change it and go back to the beginning and say something else, and then you have to edit that part in a way that's cohesive.
Yeah. And so we wanted to make it an entertaining book, and that was a, you know, I'm so sorry that it's taken so long, but it's a very long, arduous process that's almost finished. And so we're at the point now where our part of it is just about finished. And so that's exciting news. And that's why we've taken a few weeks off to get this finalized. And that's why, Jose, you just brought up this introduction, that you were finalizing, because we're just about finished with our draft. So I'm excited about that. And and when I say draft, it doesn't mean we're going to go through and rewrite it again. It just means that, you know, we're finalizing what we can do before it gets edited and then, you know, published.
Yeah. Removing all the you-knows and ums.
Oh, God.
Well, we already did some of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was, I mean, and the sound quality in our early episodes, which majority of this is our early episodes, the sound quality is pretty bad. And we ask some embarrassing questions, you know, being new at this and stuff.
Yes, that's true.
But what can you do?
Occupy Midian, the volume.
Oh my God. Yeah. That's one thing I loved about that book is reliving the Occupy Midian time. Oh my God.
We were so excited about that. Yeah.
And that put so much sort of gas in our tank as far as like continuing the podcast. We had some exciting thing that was like, I can't wait to get back to this. And, you know, I probably I took way more time away from my work than I should have, you know, to work on the
I delayed my master thesis for almost a year because of that. There were other things involved, but sure.
Yeah, getting up every morning to see how many people had joined the Occupy Midian Facebook group or signed the petition, and, you know, which new screenings there were going to be, and creating the Facebook events for them, and traveling to them too, and just all kinds of crazy stuff. And that we will talk about that in the book. And one interesting thing is that we did these interviews. A lot of the people we interviewed didn't even realize that we helped sort of found this Occupy Midian movement. And these were like cast of Nightbreed and stuff that we're talking to.
Right.
And we didn't bring it up because we're trying to be humble and we're trying to make the interview about them.
But, you know, I was just glad that we got that, that we helped a little along the way make a director's cut and then the Cabal cut and then making a commentary for the Cabal cut released by Seraphin. And that was very exciting. And that's definitely a notch in the belt that I'm very proud of and you as well. And we also got to know each other a little bit more during those times. Yeah.
And if we peaked early in our podcast because of that, you know, before we actually, you know, got good at the technical stuff and the audio and speaking and all that, that's fine. I mean, I don't mind. But it was a great memory.
Yeah, what you said earlier, like Clive said that artists value the culture that they're in. This is another part where he says, that's why I try to write popular books. That's why I try to make movies that will play at 2,000 theaters across America on a Friday night. That's why I'm interested in comic books, because this was the time when the Barkerverse was coming out with Ecto Kid and Hokum X. And, you know, there were all these like Eclipse graphic novels coming out with the adaptations of the stories of the Books of Blood. I mean, Fred, this book is from Eclipse Books, Illustrator.
Right. Can you imagine if we had the podcast in like 1990?
Oh, man, that would have been amazing.
Yeah.
Although the internet didn't really exist at the time.
No. And I was on a bulletin board system, which is like the closest version of a popular internet, you know, of an accessible internet.
I had an email that I had access with Telnet students.
Go
through the terminal, type in Telnet students. And,
my God. Yeah,
good times.
From Alaska, I used to call Jennifer and chat with her by dialing into the university and then telnetting over to my friend's University of Washington account. And then I would then from there I would go to a dial-out server and telnet over to Jennifer's computer, and then we would text chat that way, which sounds insane, you know, now, because it's like, why would you need to do that? But you did. I mean, we were avoiding long distance calling fees, you know, and figuring out a way to talk to each other without having to pay long distance.
Yeah, I mean, I was always a kind of a on board jumping into early adoption stuff. Like I was always interested in technology, and so were you. And like I was, I had a cell phone probably before a lot of people in America had a cell phone back in the early 90s, mid 90s. I had a big cell phone that actually worked with 4 AA batteries or a special battery that you would put in it. And, had a pull-out antenna. I remember when networks would charge you for text messages. I remember when I got my phone, text messages weren't actually a thing. They just discovered that, there are these the little bandwidth that can fit these many characters that we're using towards network identification information. Yeah. And we can actually allow you to use 100 and something characters to type a text message. Hey, we can charge you for this. Let's do that.
10 cents a text message or whatever.
Yeah. Nowadays, it's like, that's unimaginable. You tell a kid, we used to pay 10 cents for text message. You'd be like, what? Yeah, we live in a world where telepathy is almost a thing now.
I think Apple's kind of responsible for text messages becoming free, and that's why originally nobody wanted to take the iPhone, because they insisted that you'd be able to do your text messages over Wi-Fi and stuff, and it would just become part of the operating system.
I had a GeoCities Clive Barker website. I think my first website was created like maybe in 94, 95. Yeah, maybe 94.
I had a website dedicated to my finger puppet collection.
Oh, that's awesome.
And Emmett the Crab and stuff.
Yeah, Emmett the Crab. He should make it onto the next Kickstarter video.
He's in pretty bad shape.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
he's gotten a little rough over the years.
Yeah, and also making puppet videos. Actually, the thing that killed that the most was having a baby, because Jennifer's arms were always full with a baby when I'm trying to make a puppet video, and she always had to be there to film or to be the other characters and stuff, and so we just had to give up on it. And I wanted
the butterfly.
Yeah, and
that's when you use the baby as a puppet.
Yeah, right.
Hi, I'm Joey.
Oh my God,
making voices.
Oh yeah.
Anyway,
he would love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, going back to the book, I guess I was talking earlier about there's art that you can't tell it's Clive Barker. The one I was thinking about the most is on page 34, this fallen dove, which was made out of cutting out little pieces of paper.
Oh, yeah.
You would if you saw that, you would never know that was Clive's, I think.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, I agree. It's definitely more skeletal, more abstract. Kind of reminds me a little bit of the things that he did for Cabal illustrations, because it's very geometric. It looks almost like a cutout. Mm-hmm.
It's also got a little bit of a native Alaska native feel with the raven and stuff too. Oh, right. Yeah, but in this area here that you're talking about, these pages, page 33, there's a wonderful piece of art called the Gemini, which is just these two creatures who almost are merging into each other on their lower part of their bodies. And then their heads are kind of long, elongated to the back, and they're just in this weird landscape. And you can tell this is just charcoal, 1977 sketch. Very cool. Page 30, there's that one. Yowl is a more famous of his paintings or pictures. On page 30. Yeah. Oh yeah. This one is in Shadows in Eden for sure. Yeah. But in this section of the book, he's talking about how sometimes society and teachers and stuff try to tell you that there are ways that you can express yourself, and there are ways to behave, and there are ways that you should be like this. They give you the molds that you should fall into. Yeah. At the same time that sometimes you're getting the message that you can be whatever you want, you can do whatever you want. But then you find out the people around you don't really let you do that. And he goes into this Blake quote, right? Make your own laws or be slave to another man's laws. Exactly. Which you can't take that literally. You still have to follow the law, but you can at least ignore mores and ideas of the way art is supposed to be. Yeah, I think this is a perfect analogy for how some of his movies went, especially Nightbreed. He has a story here that says
So you want to paint a wall yellow, right? So if somebody else tells you that the wall should have been painted blue and you knew all along it should have been yellow, and you took all that time to build it, and then at the last minute you were convinced to paint it blue, and then nobody liked the wall anyway, then not only did nobody like the wall, but you also painted it a color that you didn't want to paint it. So
whereas if you painted it yellow and people still didn't like it, then at least you could say, well, I like it.
Yeah, at least you were true to yourself and you were true to the intention that you had, the idea, and you made that idea come true. You didn't let someone else tell you like, no, I don't think that's going to work, dude. You should do it this way. Then it's just interference.
And you could tell that he was talking about Nightbreed, or he was Nightbreed was on his mind when he was talking about this yellow and blue wall.
Yeah.
Nightbreed
here it is
was
on
definitely a blue wall.
Yeah, definitely. Here's on page 34 where you have that fallen dove. He usually says, he says right here, I can give you countless examples. I can give you critics who say the one piece of work I do is the most useless piece of crap, and another one says that it's glorious. I will show you people who think that Nightbreed should have never been made, and people who watch it once every week. Raise hand.
Yeah, that was us. Yeah.
I will show you fan mail from people who say that Magic is their personal Bible, and people who say that it's hopelessly overwritten, overwrought, oversexed, and whatever else.
Yeah.
I did it. I moved on. I'm doing another thing. I can't take it back. It's part of my biography, for better or worse. It's part of the shape of my life. Yeah. Because in this section, he also discusses how an artist's work is almost kind of a journal of his own inner life, right? I mean, the things that are influencing an artist at the time and the way that he's finding to express himself at the time, it can change over time. It's not always the same, and you can definitely see that with Clive. But it's also like it reflects the artist's vision and how it changes and how he goes into different states and may have a different period here and there. And it's like a journal of the artist, right?
Because we're kind of in touch with the fandom now, I think, and I don't ever see anybody that says they don't like Imagica. I mean, I think maybe there was one person we were talking to about joining the podcast, or the page. Mm-hmm. And they said, one thing I have to let you know is I don't like Imagica. And that kind of made me think, is this person just being contrarian? Because that doesn't really jive. I mean, how can somebody say they don't?
I can see it. I mean, people,
that sort of killed my enthusiasm for that particular person being on our podcast.
Sure. No, I mean, I can see that. I mean, different strokes. I mean, some people like artists that I don't mean anything to me. Yeah. So I can see why. The way that we're biased is that we deal with fandom community, we deal with fans of Clive Barker's work. So we know there's a given there that they're going to like pretty much everything that Clive does. So it's hard to find someone who says, oh, Imagica is not very good. But there are people like that out there. And I guess if you go on Goodreads, you can find reviews that bring up things in Imagica that they don't like. Yeah. And it's okay. I mean, it's okay. Not everybody has to like the same stuff, but
and my experience with Imagica was my first read through. I have pretty bad attention deficit disorder to begin with, but my first read through, I had a really hard time following. Like, okay, who is that guy? Why are we? Who is Dowd? Why are we with this guy right now? And it took. It took hundreds of pages before these characters' stories start interweaving, to the point where it made sense.
I see. Yeah, and there's a lot of characters.
As a high schooler, I had a rough time with Imagica the first time through, and only in subsequent readings did it really start sinking in.
Sure. No, I mean, I was so excited whenever I got a Clive Barker book. Like, I think I read The Great and Secret Show in like 5 or 6 days.
Oh, wow.
And that's like a 700-page book.
Yeah.
That wasn't the only time I read the book, but that, sometimes I could understand, like when you're devouring something, when you find a piece of pie that is so good that you're like, oh my God, I'm going to eat the whole pie. I don't even care. There's a moment where not even tasting the food. You're just engaging in that voracious gluttony. That's like, I want to eat this thing. Well, forkfuls of it, cram it down my throat. Then you enjoy that feeling of like, my tummy is full. But then it's like 5 hours later, you have to eat something else again, and that's out of your mind. But now you love that kind of pie, and then you're going to go back to that pie, and maybe next time you'll be a little more careful. I see what you mean, because Imagica has so many characters, and it's hard to keep track of them sometimes. Yeah. And it's also some of the characters don't seem to have a lot of description sometimes, so you kind of end up making it up in your mind.
Yeah, well, and you got Joshua Godolphin and Oscar Godolphin, and
you have the tabula rasa.
Charlie Estabrook, who's also a brother but has a different last name for some reason, and
Estabrook. Yeah, but sometimes in subsequent readings, I would actually stop sometimes and say, like, okay, let me, because I have this idea of reading books. To me, I read them in a very cinematic way. I see, like, when Gentle. Or when Godolphin is in the migrant people, camp to meet the assassin Piopa. When I'm reading that stuff, I'm reading the words, but in my mind, I'm just creating this thing where, like, I can see a fire burning in the distance, some corrugated iron things here and there, a dog barking, some old cars with their hoods open, and it's like people, trash on the floor, and people just walking through that and going towards a trailer. And I'm visualizing that in my mind, so I see it more visually when I'm reading. Mm-hmm. And sometimes part of that process already gives me, like, this weird. My brain creates faces for the characters. I don't like to see movies and then read the book because that locks in the character, how they're going to look like. So it's like, oh, this guy's going to look like Harrison Ford now that I've seen the movie. But I like to create my own. But sometimes the characters show up in the story, and it's like, well, there's not a lot of description. So I have to stop and think, okay, what does this mean? Like, oh, pinched face. Okay, what kind of face would that be? Yeah. And it's like, but it's sometimes you can only do that when you're not in that moment of, like, devouring the story. So usually the first reading for me is pretty much quick visual flashes in my mind, like reading the story. And then if I really want to know what a character looks like, I have to stop and think about it for a little bit, maybe go back another page and read again. Yeah, I could see how if you have attention deficit disorder, that would be hard to do, hard to stop yourself.
And also you when you read for a long time and then after like 3 pages, you realize that you were thinking about something else while you're reading. And so you have to turn back those 3 pages and go, okay, now start again.
That happens to me more recently. I didn't used to have that sort of problem. Nowadays, I feel like I fall into that distraction more easily. Mm. And that's not I get frustrated with that too a little bit. I don't know if it's because we've been conditioned by our phones and stuff to just
do other
not
things
read as much. Yeah, to be used to, like, consuming things in a superficial way and scroll. But I do feel like I managed to read a book recently, and I was like, wow, that actually got into it. Because I used to be able to grab a book and just sit in the couch or my bed and just read the book for 3 hours straight and, read 150 pages in one sitting. Yeah. It's like, and nowadays it's kind of hard to do that.
Or sometimes the book signings used to force me to do that because, like Mr. Begone and other ones too, the bookstores would say, if you want to come to our book signing, you have to buy the book from us. And I'm like, but I'm in Alaska. I want to read this. And so I would call them and order it and say, hold it for me. And then I would get the book that day. I'd go in early and pick up the book, go back to the hotel or whatever, and try to read the entire book before the book signing so that I would know what this thing is that I'm getting signed. Uh-huh. And I could actually, if it came up in conversation, I could talk about it. But then, of course, it never actually came up in conversation at the book signings anyway.
Yeah.
He would want to talk about the us, where we come from, what we're doing.
Sure. That was another book that I devoured immediately and then had to go back for a second reading because I think I read that book in like an afternoon.
Yeah.
It's just you can't put it down. You have a demon literally forcing you to keep reading.
Yeah.
Here's another interesting thing that Clive says in page 39. He says, I was taught that art and religion had nothing to do with each other, which is probably the single biggest lie that I've ever been told. I was told art as a secular activity, which is, with even a casual glance at the history of art and of the significance of art in our culture, such a terrible nonsense, such a divisive piece of crap. And why was art so connected to religion? I feel like, one, it was a way of getting, patrons, because the Catholic Church would put so many artists under its wing to create art for churches and stuff that it was a way to get paid. But also, it was another way of artists to shoehorn, and I use shoehorn in like a gentle kind of thing, not necessarily a hacky sort of way, but it was an easy way to get into people's minds at the time, like in the Renaissance and stuff, because you couldn't make weird art like this in the Renaissance days. People would think that you were a heretic and you were crazy, and they would send you to Bedlam and whatever, and they wouldn't want to see like monsters and stuff. And you had to like invest it with a sort of like ritualistic, like, oh, look at this, and look at here are the gods, Jupiter, and blah blah blah, and it had to be inside that kind of contextualized religious matter that people could look into it and say, oh yeah, look, it's Jupiter, and it's a guy holding a lightning, and it's totally acceptable. But if you just say this is a man standing naked and holding a star in his hand, or holding, and there's a monster at his feet with a chain going up to the guy's hand, people would think this is horrible, this is obscene. They wouldn't like that. But invested with this metaphysical quality that people can contextualize it in, and it's part of their own belief system, and they would accept that weird fantastical art much more quickly.
And also in medieval times, the population couldn't read a lot of the time, so they'd at least have something visual to go along with what the church is telling them.
Sure.
Religious doctrine.
And then they go to church, and it was all read in Latin, and they couldn't understand Latin either. So what a weird time.
Yeah. He goes on to talk about also a time period when he got into a pretty big depression and didn't get much done, and he was feeling things really deeply, like not seeing TV shows or movies or reading books,
looking at his dog.
Yeah, it would just hit him with these super powerful emotions, would trigger stuff in him.
Yeah, he would just be overwhelmed with emotion.
Yeah, and I can definitely feel that. It's weird. I had I remember this one time that there was like a turning point for me between when I was desensitized and stuff didn't bother me, and then after I had met Jennifer and I saw the movie Seven, and it just really, really gutted me to see that him opening the box and his wife's head is in the box, and I'm like, that's just awful.
Yeah.
And after that, I just got really sensitive to seeing things about, people being tortured or people being forced to see bad stuff happening to people they care about and stuff like that.
Yeah, it comes with a certain kind of maturing, I guess, when, people, when they're young, they think, oh, I can see any shock stuff. That doesn't bother me at all. But then, you fall in love, and then you have kids, and then you realize, oh, there's stuff I really don't want to look at anymore because it just makes me come to grips with, what if this happened to the people I love? What if this happened to my child? And it's like, you just become more in tune with people's feelings and stuff. And I guess that kind of brashness of youth and say, I can listen to this kind of music and I can watch these movies and it doesn't bother me at all. But then you become more sensitive with age, and you start realizing that, maybe the stuff I'm putting inside myself needs to be curated a little more closely. At least that's my experience.
But then we're also in a way fooling ourselves too, right? Like if you watch Star Wars and you see 100 stormtroopers get shot and fall down, and they have helmets on, so it's not real violence, and then it takes away the impact of violence, and it's just sort of, in a way that's almost worse because violence is nothing, and you see that in movies and video games all the time where something doesn't count as murder unless it's someone or something up close or something where you can see the person's face, but they could shoot 100 Nazis or stormtroopers or whatever, and they don't even think about it like
the Squid Game, right? I've noticed that K-dramas seem to have a lot of violence in them. There's this the Squid Game thing. If anybody out there listening watched it, that game is like.
Did you watch it?
Yeah, I watched the whole show on Netflix, and there's some really nasty violence in there. Like the first game, there's 100 and something people are massacred, and there's very graphic shots of people getting their brains blown out and stuff. Oh. There's graphic images of bodies being harvested for organs, for example, later in the show. But it's it's okay because it's this Squid Game, right? So it's like everybody's watching it, and it's fun to see K-drama seems to be very cliffhangery. It's very addictive.
Yeah.
There's another one called Alice in Borderlands, and there's another one called Hellbound that I've watched recently. It's about this these weird demons show up. So people get this visitation of what they call an angel, letting them know, Ryan Denhauser, you will, in 7 days at 9:30 you will die and you are bound to hell. Okay, the angel disappears, and then in 6 days at 9:30, 3 giant demons appear, and they beat you up, kill you, and then burn your body and take you to hell and leave your burned husk behind. And this starts happening, and people don't know why this is happening. There's a cult that's created around this that says, we know why this is going on. The world needs to be a better place. They create a religion called the New Truth. They kind of take over, like they become a huge thing because they found a way that they can explain what's going on, even though it's complete nonsense. And there's another group of people who say, well, maybe this is just a weird supernatural phenomenon. These people don't really go to hell. And, they start noticing that the people who get the announcement, their families, their friends, those people become ostracized by society because, like, what would happen if you knew all of a sudden that, this guy's going to hell? He must be a horrible person, right? If God himself sent an angel to tell him he's going to hell, we don't want anything to do with that person. That's a huge shame on their family.
So in that show, they don't make it clear, that this is a really bad person and that's why they're going to hell.
Well, that new church cult starts creating this narrative around every one of these things that, like, these people were terrible. Let's try to find out what their sins were. And, And then a complete innocent person, and I'm not going to spoil it for anybody who hasn't heard it, but a completely innocent person gets the warning, and that's complete proof that, there's no reason for these announcements, that it's just a random event that happens, a random supernatural event, that there's no way that these people are being taken to hell because of their sins. And then the church doesn't want that to be seen and discovered, and they feel like if people don't have something to keep them in check, then, and if they realize that God is random and these things don't have any meaning, that it would be the end of the world, right? It would be, everybody would do whatever they want.
That's kind of cruel to warn them when there's nothing they can do about it.
Yeah. Anyway. But there's a lot of violence in that show too. Yeah. There's like the demons come and they beat you up and blood sprays all over the walls and they smash you and they grab you by the foot and smash you on the ground and then they burn your body and leave a burned husk. Wow. And it's like K-drama seems to have so much, this fantastic K-drama shows seem to have so many so much violence in them.
So
which is okay.
Hellbound is Korean also?
Yeah, I think so, Yeah. It's from the guy who made Train to Busan, which is a zombie movie. Yeah. And then Alice in Borderlands is about these 3 friends that one of them loses their job or whatever, so they go and meet up at this Harajuku station or whatever, or Hokkaido, I don't know, one of those stations. And then they go into a bathroom because they're trying to escape the police because they were just lounging around. And then when they come out of the bathroom, the whole city's empty, okay? Nobody's there. And then they just stand in front of that heart of that town being like, what the hell is going on? Where did everybody go? And then they start seeing these lights in the distance, and then they see like one of those big screens in downtown says something like the game is about to begin in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then they get like they go to that stadium where the lights are shining and they find these like signs saying this way to the game, and all of a sudden they're stuck in this game where they have to go through these rooms and they have to pick 2 doors on each room. And then some other people show up. And then if you don't pick the right door, you're burned to death. And then the room starts filling up with poisonous gas. And then the people who fail the challenge are killed with a laser beam that comes out of the sky and pierces your skull. And it's just weird. It's like these weird scenarios, right? But extremely violent stuff where the people become pawns in a game. And like you said, this violence is brutal and it's very visual, but at the same time it becomes meaningless because we also know that it's just a show. It's just a weird show. And then we become addicted to this stuff more than because sometimes, the end of Squid Game, it's interesting, but it's like, I left more questions than answers. Same with Hellbound. I was left with more questions than answers at the end of that. They don't know if they're going to make a season 2. It was just like, I went through this whole journey going from episode to episode in a cliffhanger, It's waiting for a solution or an answer, and then they leave you without one. They just say, well, this was an experience. And Clive Barker mentions something about that here, like, for example, American audiences and how they expect things to be to be wrapped up at the end, right? They expect things. They don't want things to be just weird without explanation. Yeah. They want things to have kind of like a beginning, a middle, and an end. And sometimes, art doesn't provide you with answers. It just provides you with a state that you go through, and it provides you with this feeling and this experience. Yeah. And it's up to you to make sense of it. And they don't really owe you any answers.
Well, and as much as that's true, also American companies are guilty of pulling the rug out from under the creators before they even get a chance to finish something.
Oh, yeah, of course. That too. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he says right here on page 59, Barker's imagery is also cloaked with uncertainty and unparticularity and looming dissolution that raises questions about the very nature of reality. One of the things you always want to be able to do as an artist is create the sense of mystery. You want to be able to exquisitely express what is expressible. I mean, that's part of what you want to do, but at the same time, you want to veil the expression in such a way that you never allow the reader or the viewer to completely get it. And one of my problems with a lot of American movies, for instance, and particularly American fantasy movies, is how explicit they are. I don't mean in terms of the explicitness of what you're actually showing, but with what you're showing means. Some of these particularly striking sketches, like on page 63, you have Man Maddened by a Flower. I just love this one.
Yeah.
It's just this guy is looking at a flower, and his eyes look so bug-eyed and wide, and he's grabbing his head, and it's like, this flower. I'm going crazy. It's just he becomes so...
Yeah.
It's like he can't stop obsessing about the flower. He cannot stop looking at the detail and the exquisiteness and the beauty of it, and it's too much, and there's no way that he can stop, which is a way that, most of us, we live in a world in a state of very discriminating focus, right? I mean, we don't experience everything at once. We just focus on what we want to experience. There's so many things going on around us. If we were able to experiencing all the things going around us, we'd go crazy. We have so much stimuli coming in through our eyes, our ears, our tactile sensations. If we were feeling what our feet feel like against our socks, and then our pants feel against our legs, and the wind blowing on our skin, and we have all these things happening at once, we kind of filter most of that out.
Oh yeah, I run into that all the time. People are like, "Oh, did you see the aurora last night?" I'm like, "No, I went to sleep."
Yeah. And Frank in Hellraiser, right, in Hellbound Heart, he experiences this state of like experiencing everything at once, and it becomes so much to him that it becomes almost an infernal sensation, right? And he begs to be released from that.
Yeah, pain and pleasure indivisible.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is also a section where he talks about the age of last things, which was a little bit depressing. This idea that things are disappearing from the world, and I think this was on his mind because probably the beginnings of Sacrament were on his mind, and the idea of animals that were going extinct and things going away that will never come back again.
Yeah, Jacob Steep in Sacrament is the killer of last things, right? So he finds animals that are on the verge of extinction, and he kills them. The demon putting out his eyes.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that one in particular. I think if there were one or like original kind of famous sketch or painting that I would want to get, it would be that one. It was really kind of tied to my identity in high school. I wore that T-shirt to death. With that on there. So I don't know who owns it or where it's at, but if anybody knows, if anybody's interested, I would, and if I could afford it, I would want that.
It's an amazing piece. They even made a statue of it, I remember, at one point.
That's right.
I think it's amazing. I think, if they sold this at the Clive Barker Archive, even just prints of it, I would definitely buy it. I would definitely buy this on a white sweatshirt or something. That would be an amazing design.
Yeah, that would also be a good
Phil and Sarah, help me out.
Yeah. I would love that. Yeah. That's one thing that I always wondered about this one, because he's a demon, right? And he has horns on his head. Mm-hmm. But if you follow the arc of his fingers, those
Of
could
course.
also be his fingers going through the
Yeah.
eye sockets and out the top of his head.
That's what I always saw it as.
Yeah.
Because his fingers are already long enough when they get into his eye sockets that they're too long.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And makes you wonder, what did the demon see that made him take out his eyes, right?
Yeah.
He's a demon.
Yeah, right.
Or is he just a person with really fantastical, like, fingers? No, he's a demon. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it really makes you think why this is happening. Is this a statue? Is this, again, it's demon putting out his eyes. Just that title just brings so much to the painting. The painting itself is already pretty impressive, but the title is really what drives it home to me.
Yeah.
There's so much interesting stuff in these texts. I mean, I can't really, mention all the stuff, but some of these drawings are pretty amazing.
Yeah. Well, and I hope that everybody out there listening was able to, pull out their copy if you have it and follow along. And if you don't have it, that this was still a good, entertaining episode for you. And you might consider looking into buying one of these. They're not that expensive.
Yeah, you can still find them in Amazon and eBay for relatively accessible prices.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have owned the paperback version and the hardcover versions, and actually their prices aren't really that different from each other.
I bought this one from Francis Clay Ornick. Again, I want to thank him, and it was a pretty good price. I won't say how much it was, but it was a pretty good price. It was the double digits, let's say.
Yay!
Yeah, but
nice.
Here's an interesting point that Clive brings near the end. He's talking about the difference between a painting and a film, right? So and how it ages. When an image on canvas catches our emotion, it can capture us in a way that's profound, less likely to decay, less subject to vagaries of fashion and taste. Even great moves, though, date badly. They become cliche. Horror movies become cliche. Romances become simply sentimental. And then he goes to say that.
And that's like the beginning of Weave World.
Yeah, that we love movies sometimes sentimentally.
Yeah.
Which is, the nature of a movie versus a painting. There is definitely a difference in medium there. There is a difference in permanence. Because when you look at a painting, it's a vignette, right? It's a one square box that just you can put it in your mind, and then you can go back to it and see it in its entirety, and you can experience what it makes you feel. And a movie is a long, undulating thing, and it's a collaborative effort. It has all sorts of parts that could be better than others, but it's like it becomes more of an experience. But like you said, sometimes movies age badly, whereas a painting becomes more timeless because it's a one full realized vision, right?
I can see that point of view, but it doesn't. I don't know, that doesn't work for me. I mean, I love movies, and and things in there, in not just in the context of when they came out, and I say, I don't think King Kong is quaint. For me, it's still terrifying that he grabs a log and spins it around until people start falling off to their deaths.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I get what he's saying, that special
that paintings
effects
evoke more mythological responses from us, and a movie, you're more engaged in what's going on with the movie. You're not sitting there meditating on the meaning of a particular frame. You're it's a different kind of feeling.
Right, and he's saying that paintings don't have aging special effects and things like that.
That's true to an extent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there was that screenshot that David posted about a demo of the Unreal Engine 5 or something like that, or someone new.
Sure,
new Unreal Engine, and he was like, "Man, look at this! I never want to look at anything else again."
Right.
And that kind of made me think about my experience with video games, and to me, the more realistic they are, the more I hate them. I like video games as an art form and as escapism, and I don't want it to look photorealistic, because also in a way, the more photorealistic it is, the more they have this sort of unnatural,
Uncanny Valley thing.
Yeah.
Okay, I can see that. To me, I like them when they're more photorealistic because I feel more immersed in them. I'm more about the immersion in a computer game. But it all depends on the enjoyment that you get out of them, too. It all depends on the heart that's put into that. There once was a big controversy about Clive Barker talking about games as art, and some other art critics said that they weren't art and all that stuff.
Yeah, that was Roger Ebert.
Morrowind, okay, a game from 2000.
Yes.
And you go back to it now, and you're like, oh my god, look at these models, look at these faces. Oh my god, this is so few polygons on this stuff. But you go to DeviantArt and you find artists painting Morrowind landscapes, and you're like, that's what I was thinking about when I was playing these games. That's how I remember them, because they're detailed, and you remember this stuff being like the landscapes. When you think back to those computer games, or even like Myst or something, you remember them as being more beautiful than they really were. Mm-hmm. And then you go back to them and you're like, oh, I'm disappointed. Yeah, I imagine, when the next Elder Scrolls or whatever comes out, or the next Fallout, how photorealistic is that going to be? And Unreal Engine 5 is now being used to make stuff like Matrix Resurrections and stuff.
Oh,
so
yeah.
a lot of that,
The Mandalorian.
The Mandalorian, right. So it's got these crazy advancements where you can have trillions of polygons on a frame and animate it in real time, and it works. It's insane. It's insane. But definitely that there's an art aspect to that as well. I do recommend this book. It's a fantastic book, not just for the images, but for the text.
Yeah, and it's great to see this duality, or these two books, and how the focus shifted from hey, this artist that you love, he's also or this writer and movie maker that you love, he's also an artist. To this one saying hey, everybody knows he's an artist. Look how great all of this is.
Yes. Yeah. There's some Thief of Always paintings near the end here on pages 105, 106, 107. You have the unused Lulu for the Thief of Always. But what a beautiful, beautiful book. I'm so glad that I had a chance to read it again for the podcast. And just the text is just such amazing stuff in terms of Clive's expression of his own philosophy of art. And it's just beautiful. So really enjoy this. Illustrator 2. This podcast, having no beginning, will have no end.
Thank you for joining us, and we hope you have subscribed. You can find the Clive Barker podcast wherever you find audio. Show notes for this episode, as well as news and reviews, can be found at our website at www.clivebarkercast.com. The Clive Barker Podcast, or BarkerCast, is an independent editorial podcast and blog that is not affiliated with or under contract by Clive Barker or Seraphim Inc. This is a labor of love by the fans for the fans. Watch for our annual Kickstarter fundraisers to get some cool stuff, and you can buy t-shirts on our TeePublic store. Go to tpublic.com and search for BarkerCast.
Thanks for listening.